Today, we're cracking open a cold case, a 550-million-year-old mystery literally stamped right into the fossil record. We're traveling back to a time long before the dinosaurs, before trees, and even before the very first fish, to unmask one of the most enigmatic life forms our planet has ever produced.
Imagine, if you will, our oldest known animal ancestor. But instead of some fierce prehistoric beast, it looks, well, a lot like a giant ribbed bath mat. Seriously, let's dive right in and imagine a creature with absolutely no mouth, no eyes, and no gut that somehow still managed to totally rule the ancient seafloor. It sounds like science fiction, but this is a very real, very peculiar part of our own evolutionary history.
For over 70 years, this thing has been paleontology's ultimate cold case. Researchers were totally baffled by these bizarre fossils. What was it? Was it a plant? A fungus? Some giant single-celled organism? Or was it our oldest animal ancestor?
Ediacaran enigma.
To solve this mystery, we first need to understand the incredibly alien world this creature lived in. Rewind to the Ediacaran Period, roughly 567 to 550 million years ago. The ocean floor back then was this serene, almost eerie landscape. There was zero predators hunting in the water column. Instead, the shallow marine environments were dominated by thick, continuous layers of bacteria and organic slime known as microbial mats.
Meet Dickinsonia.
So, who exactly was grazing in this ancient slime pasture? Enter our primary suspect, Dickinsonia. It was first discovered in the raw red rocks of South Australia back in 1946, and it brilliantly shows just how wild early life really was. While a lot of the soft-bodied organisms from that era were microscopic, Dickinsonia could get absolutely massive. This ribbed, oval-shaped creature could grow up to 1.4 meters long. Just picture that for a second, a soft-bodied organism the size of a coffee table creeping along the bottom of the ocean.
But here's where it gets genuinely weird. It had literally none of the standard animal plumbing. No mouth, no anus, no through gut connecting them. Instead, it had this network of blind food-gathering pockets, a diffusive nervous system, and a fuzzy underside covered in tiny hairs called cilia that constantly secreted mucus. So the obvious question is, how on earth does a creature without a mouth or an internal gut actually eat and survive?
Well, it had an absolutely ingenious survival strategy. It ate inside out. It would use that mucus to glue itself down onto the microbial mat, then it secreted digestive enzymes directly onto the seafloor beneath it, basically melting the slime. Finally, it just absorbed those digested nutrients straight up into its ciliated belly. When it was full, it'd unstick itself and move on, leaving behind a ghost-like feeding footprint in the sediment that paleontologists call an epibion trace fossil. It was literally slurping up its meals as it crept along the mud.
The great taxonomy debate.
Because of that bizarre anomaly, figuring out where this thing fit on the tree of life sparked a bitter, decades-long debate. When a researcher named Sprigg first found it in 1947, he thought, okay, it's an early jellyfish. By the 1980s, folks looked at those ribbed segments and thought it must be an annelid worm. Fast forward to 2013, and one researcher even argued it wasn't marine at all, but a land-dwelling lichen. Crazy, right? But the case finally cracked in 2018. Scientists found these incredibly pristine fossils in Russia that still contained organic material. They ran some tests and found cholesterol biomarkers. And since cholesterol is exclusively produced by animals, that forensic chemical evidence proved, once and for all, that Dickinsonia was an animal.
Solving the growth mystery. Proving it was an animal was really only half the battle. To see exactly where it fits in our family tree, researchers had to decode its biological blueprint for growth. If you compare Dickinsonia to other life forms of the Ediacaran period, the difference is striking. A lot of other creatures back then, like the plant-looking ranger morphs, grew through chaotic fractal branching, basically just repeating the same shape over and over to fill up 3D space. But Dickinsonia? It displayed highly regulated growth, carefully expanding to maximize its surface area without ever losing its signature egg-like shape. Let's break down exactly how this highly regulated growth worked. It grew through a process called isometric inflation. It would exclusively add new segments or modules at its posterior or back end. As it grew, the length of its central midline stayed exactly the same, while the older modules predictably widened and bent outward to keep the creature's oval shape. And all of this was held together by a tough but pliable outer membrane. This proves it wasn't just some haphazard blob. It was a highly complex creature running on ancient genetic regulatory networks.
Our ancient animal ancestor. So what is the final verdict on our 550-million-year-old cold case? Where does Dickinsonia sit on the tree of life? Well, the answer is amazing, but also a little tragic. Dickinsonia represents an extinct lineage of eumetazoa. It was a true evolutionary missing link that used the very first blueprints of animal life, taking advantage of developmental genes to build a complex body. But this particular lineage completely vanished. It died out just before modern animals exploded onto the scene during the Cambrian period.
Now, why does this matter to us? Well, the big takeaway here is that understanding this giant, extinct bath mat creature gives us the foundation of our own biology. Dickinsonia shares a strong evolutionary affinity with the Herbalaria, that is, the hypothetical common ancestor of all bilaterally symmetrical animals. That means understanding how Dickinsonia grew its left and right sides is actually a window into the exact same bilateral symmetry that eventually led to insects, fish, and ultimately to you and me.
Which leaves us with one pretty mind-bending thought. Dickinsonia was incredibly successful in its time, yet it represents an entire, unique branch of the early animal tree that was totally erased by time. If a lineage of coffee table-sized, slime-eating, symmetrical animals can just vanish, what other bizarre, alien blueprints of life are still hiding right now in the rocks beneath our feet? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.